School authorities in Massachusetts and across the country have recently been dealing with complaints of racist slurs, homophobic rhetoric, sexual harassment, and other inappropriate behavior at sporting events. St. John Paul II School in Hyannis forfeited a football game after players were accused of using racial slurs. At Foxborough High School, the superintendent asked parents to talk with their kids about rude behavior and vulgar language at high school games. In the fall, a fight broke out between Georgetown and Roxbury Prep. Some of the black players on Roxbury said they were repeatedly harassed by Georgetown players and fans and were called the N-word. In Duxbury, it was reported that the football team used anti-Semitic language in play calls, and in Danvers there have been reports of hazing and racist language amongst the hockey team. It is an issue that has been in the news and deserves an in-depth look. Hello, and welcome to another edition of BNEWS In Depth. After a number of incidents involving racial slurs and otherwise inappropriate behavior happened at high school sporting events, we decided to take a look at how leaders in sports are handling the situation and trying to improve things moving forward. That is the subject of this month's show. We will be talking with MIAA Director Bob Baldwin, BHS Athletic Director Sean Hart, and Burlington's Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Raymond Porch about how leadership can help students behave better and become better people. We start now with my interview with Bob Baldwin. I'm now joined by MIAA Executive Director Bob Baldwin. Bob, thanks for taking some time to discuss this. I know it can be a difficult subject to talk about, but I think it's an important one to tackle.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, there's been this year a number of incidents. We had, Duxbury High School, it came out that they had anti-Semitic play calls. Danvers had some hazing and racist events. Georgetown, Southeastern Regional Vocational, Tewksbury. I think there might be a couple others that are left off the list. When you see something like this happen, what's sort of like your visceral response to it?
I'm going to repeat myself from the beginning, but my initial response was I was speechless. And I know that's the visceral, because I was probably more enraged and thinking, how could this possibly be that people treat people this way? But I couldn't put a word to it. So I was speechless at the time, just reading what had taken place, and then in multiple facets and multiple areas, just very concerning.
Now, these things are not necessarily new, but I saw you talking with another outlet, and you said that the approach that the MIAA is taking is different than it has been in the past. Can you talk about just sort of, how things are changing?
I just think we need to be out in front of this. One person and one entity cannot change this, but sports are really to people, and athletics give a spotlight, a microscope, a magnifying glass, however you want to put it. And if we can use the platform of athletics and student athletes and student leaders to model correct behavior, maybe we can change behavior throughout. And it's really a high bar, but can the platform of interscholastic athletics help change behaviors to be more civil and kind, and do more for the greater good in the long run?
And do you think that the approach that the MIAA is taking is different than it has been in the past?
So I can't, I'm new.
Right.
So of course it's going to be different from the past. I'm going to live to my core values and beliefs. I really want to hit things head on. I want to be open and honest. When you do that, you ultimately open yourself up for criticism. That's okay. If you're moving in the direction of trying to for right behavior and for good action for kids, I'll take that risk any day. But again, I think what the MIA is trying to say is we need to partner. Let's not have 6 different silos across the Commonwealth all try and do the same thing. Mm-hmm. Why don't we come together and try and make a difference for our kids, for their greater good? And so trying to be a connector, so to speak, trying to be a convener, so to speak, to just bring all these different entities together so we can act as one and change these behaviors.
And how do you work or communicate with the different school athletic departments? Like, what's sort of the function of it as far as how the different organizations sort of communicate?
Well, that's a great question. I was a superintendent of schools for 16 and a half years and a principal for 5 years, and I certainly didn't want an association telling me locally what I should be doing in my locale. So I totally respect and get that each and every community has their own uniqueness, their own context, and should have the ability to do things the way they feel they should be done. Our job is to provide the support and resources to help them, to reach out to them. Certainly not play, judge, jury, and executioner in issues. Those are local control issues. But at the same time, what support and resources can we give proactively ahead of time in the future, as opposed to reactionary, which is kind of the case that we're in now. So it's going to be a lot of work. We're working as hard as we can now, but at the same time, issues keep happening, and we know they're going to happen. But can we be that association that is supportive, that is resourceful to our local communities, so that they have the tools that they need to get the job done in their own context?
And I think one of the big things that kind of comes into play here is just the role of accountability when things like this happen. So what do you think is the appropriate kind of accountability? And is it different when it's athletes that are participating in this kind of behavior versus when it's fans in the stand?
Oh, great question. I live by the adage I was taught a long time ago: what did you know, when did you know it, and what did you do about it? And I was a principal when we started to deal with the anti-bullying behavior. And it's not, the assistant principal or the principal or the person of high authority. It's those small interactions with your teachers in the corridor who say, wait a minute, that's not how we behave here. It's your coach in the locker room saying, whoa, these are my expectations. This is how it's done. I think it's one relationship at a time. But holding people and teaching them in the educational world, teaching them that this is the acceptable way and the unacceptable. Part of this group, because participation in interscholastic athletics is a privilege, not a right, to be a part of this is the way we need to behave. And we need to hold everyone accountable for those behaviors.
And so we had a little bit of a glitch there with the internet, one of our connections, but I think we can make it work. Do you think sports has a unique, ability to sort of help model those behaviors? I mean, it is a very interactive. You are working, on a team. You have most likely, in today's schools, people of all backgrounds, orientations on that team. Do you think sports sort of offers a unique opportunity to kind of, set the path forward in the right way?
Oh, most definitely. I think interscholastic athletics and sports may be one of the last opportunities we have where we bring all of the melting pot of everyone together and say, this is our goal collectively. I believe that sports can be that group. In my previous positions, we would have a vacancy in a physics class, and people would be upset. And what are you going to do about that vacancy? If you had a problem with your JV girls soccer team, you'd have 120 people at a school committee meeting. If you have a vacancy in that physics class, it may never come to light. And that's wrong. The prioritization may not be what we think it should be, but that's real. And so let's use sports as a positive platform to create behavior change for the future. And I believe that our student athletes, our members of our drama club, band, et cetera, are our student leaders in a school building. And maybe the middle schoolers in the elementary, someday I want to be like this person. Well, if they're watching that person act and model in a correct way, maybe we can change these behaviors little by little.
And, obviously, kids are susceptible to what they see in the greater world, and, they see behaviors of not only the adults in their lives, but, nationally and, on social media and everything like that. Do you think there's just something kind of in the atmosphere or in the culture right now that is sort of making these actions seem more permissible that needs to be addressed?
Totally. These behaviors are from a deeper issue. When somebody acts out and behaves, it's because usually there's something else deeper behind that. I'm no expert. This is not.
Yeah, I know. A little sociological question there, but.
No, but I will tell you that 2 years in a row of being no structure, no discipline, and when I say discipline, routine in a person's life, and all of a sudden you might have been in 3 months of ninth grade and now you're a junior. That's a different way to act. Or what do our young people? What have they seen for the last 2 years with the way their adults have been acting? Our adults have not set a very high bar for our children to watch. And so you put those two together, what do we expect? We as adults need to model the behaviors better for our young people, and maybe getting back into the school setting and routine and structure will help as well. So there's a most definite point that the behaviors that we see today are a condition of something that's happened in the last couple of years. And the something that's happened is the obvious.
Yeah. Right. So I know you're busy. I don't want to hold you too long. I do kind of want to end more on an aspirational note, because I think that, it's the right thing to do. It's the right, venue to do it in. So, when you talk to, members of your organization and the different athletic directors, and you see, how people are responding to this, and not just sort of like brushing it aside or trying to downplay it, what kind of gives you, some hope that, people are acting in good faith and moving in the right direction?
So I am the most ordinary, normal human being that's ever been put on this earth. And I've been able to get to certain places because I believe in the majority of people believing that doing good is the right thing to do, and trusting that the majority of our young people know what the right thing to do is. So having faith in society in general, that they really want it better. They really want to have good behavior. And while we have outlier behaviors, while we have criticism rampant, that's all we hear is the criticism. I believe that 85 to 90% say, keep moving this forward, please, because it's the right thing for us. So while I may not hear that along the way, and what I'll hear is the criticism or people trying to get in the way, I really have a belief that the greater good for the long term says, let's try and do what's right here, and it will make a difference. So that's my belief system. It's worked for me my whole life. It hasn't failed me yet. Believe me, there's roadblocks and perseverance you have to endure through it all. But I have a great faith in humanity that we do know what's right, and we do want what's right, and we just need to step up and do it.
Excellent. Well, I think that is a good note to end on. I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk to me about this. Like I said, difficult but important subject.
Richard, it's my pleasure, and I appreciate you bringing this subject out and forward. We can't hide behind it. The issues are real, and we need to address them.
Absolutely. Well, once again, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We go now to my interview with BHS Athletic Director Sean Hart about how the department works to create an inclusive atmosphere here in the district. Let's check it out. I'm now joined by Burlington High School Athletic Director Sean Hart. Sean, thanks for taking some time and coming over and speaking with me today.
Great, no problem.
So, just as an athletic director, when you see incidents like, what we've been talking about, racial slurs chanted at games, incidents between athletes, what sort of your first reaction?
Well, again, I think you hear about stuff all the time. Again, there's a lot of positive stuff that goes on in athletics, and there's a lot of positive stuff that goes on in schools, and you hear these negative things. And again, I think it's one of those things where you kind of wish you could hear all of the stories, because I know in some of them, I get the background and some of the things that were going on and things like that. And I think you're never happy about it. You know what I mean? It's always a tough conversation. It's always a tough time. You wonder how it happened. You think back to, the first things I think everybody was hearing about was the Duxbury thing earlier this year.
Right.
And then people start talking about the Danvers piece and all these other things. And then all these little stories start popping out where I thought that happened or I thought this happened. And, again, it's a bad situation and you didn't want to wish it on anybody. But the answer to the question, it's never comfortable, and then you have a conversation with your people here, and making sure that it doesn't happen here, and how things can kind of go around. But again, it's like anything else. You know what I mean? At some point, something happens that you have to deal with. So ultimately, I think the people that were in charge there are doing the things they can to not make it go away, but to make it seen, heard in their school, and understand where they can go forward with it.
Right. And I know there's been some conversations here, with you, administration, and the coaches. What's sort of been discussed here in Burlington?
Well, so for us, it's kind of, again, we were having a conversation, and I said this the other night when I was at school committee, is that we're very fortunate in the fact that we have a very veteran staff here. So I think our guys have seen a lot, they've heard a lot, and they've done a lot. So I think it kind of helps us in the fact that our commitment to the continuity of what we bring to the table as coaches in the athletic department, there's not a lot of people who don't know what we expect. You know what I mean, along the way.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of makes it nice in that way. But again, we meet with coaches. My athletic, as the athletic director, I meet with the coaches literally sometimes daily, sometimes weekly. You know what I mean. But we meet a couple times a year. We meet in a preseason meeting. We meet mid-season. We meet at the end of the season to discuss how things go. So when you think of the fact that a season is anywhere from 10 to 12 weeks long, and I meet with them 3 times during that time, you know what I mean?
It's pretty regular.
It's pretty regular. And again, because of our staff being such a veteran staff, I mean, my door is always open. They spend a lot of time in my office. They're checking in. They're coming in to find out what's going on. But the impetus for us is again, it's at the varsity level, everybody wants to talk wins and losses and things like that. But again, I think coaching character and having character kids and having kids that want to be here and understand that it's a privilege to be able to put on a jersey that has your town's name on it. I think we're really good at making sure they understand that there's a level of expectation and a level of excellence that we're trying to provide, and this community deserves that. So I think that it's a good message, and I think it's messaging that all our coaches send.
Yeah, talk about the importance of how the coach can really kind of set the tone for the team as far as their behavior modeling for their athletes.
Well, I think that student athletes that play sports are there because they have a passion for being there. So again, you're already you're not forcing anybody to be there. You're not forcing anybody to have to take part in this. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you have somebody who is so willing to be there that, again, they're willing to take advice. They're willing to listen to what has to say. And I mean, I'm not saying that every kid is going to be ultra coachable at every moment, but
Sure.
The thing is that it's a different look when you're there. And again, I feel like you're going to be an athlete here for 4 years. You could graduate from here and you could go on and play college. But the answer to the question is that Ray Porch and I were having this conversation, and I thought it was a good point that he brought up, is you're going to be a good human being a lot longer than you're going to be a good athlete.
True.
You know what I mean? So it was a nice thing. We met with our entire winter, all of our winter athletes. We met with all our winter coaches, myself, Mark Sullivan, Eric Conti, and Ray Porch, and we just had a conversation with them about just the commitment to character around competing with character around athletics. And it was nice to have the conversation because the 4 of us get to stand in front of everybody and have a conversation about the fact that you have 4 guys who are all older than everybody in that room. But the answer to the question is that all of us played sports. All of us have a vested interest in sports here. We have every level was covered, from high school to college to some professional to now coaching to now being part of what we do here. So they sit in those seats and they have the conversations like they're the first group of students that have ever heard this. And they forget that all of us have already been through it all.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it was a nice conversation to be able to have with the kids. And it just, again, I think that they understand it, they heard it, the coaches have been there, and they're reinforcing it with the kids. So I think we're not in a bad spot to kind of move it forward with the conversation.
Good. And do you think that sports, kind of has a unique opportunity to sort of teach these kind of values? Because, it is more than just, it's both learning the technical parts of it, it's the athleticism, and it's also the team camaraderie. And it just seems like a ripe sort of place to be able to kind of instill these other character values in students.
Yeah, no, I think I think, again, yeah, I mean, when you want to be there and you're passionate about something, I think it's sports, it's theater, it's club, it's anything that you're driven to or want to be part of gives you an opening to kind of listen more or want to be a bigger role in it. And I think that's an important piece. But again, you also know, you hear the other side of that. You know what I mean? It's making sure that we're monitoring what's going on. It's making sure that the door isn't closed. You know what I mean? And what I mean by that is, again, that when you have these small pockets of doors closed where ideas can start to fester or people think they can talk in a certain way, that's what we want to make sure that we're being part of that. Again, coaches in the room being part of the conversation, not separate conversations. And I think that's a big piece. And I think that the kids understand that here, and I think our coaches have that access and they have those relationships, which I think has really been able to bring us into being, again, having the conversations that we're having.
Now, some of the incidents, obviously, it's not even usually the athletes. A lot of times it's the fans, have been chanting things or, having disputes in the stands. Is there anything that, as an athletic director that, you can do to influence how the fans react? Are the students just watching that, even on the teams? Is there anything that the teams can do, model certain behaviors that, make it so that, the passion of the fan base is more positive than, negative?
Yeah, so again, I feel like for us, and as a league, we've had a lot of conversations actually about having consistency within the league. So when you play in Burlington, you're going to hear the same messaging that when you play in Woburn, you're going to hear the messaging there. Mm-hmm. So you have a group of students that will come to a game, and when it's at my building, there is a level of expectation that we have. So we tell these guys, we read the announcements, we tell them the kind of attitudes that we wish to have there. If any of these other things happen, you'll be escorted out. You won't be asked to come back. They know all of those things. They're read at every game. They're read at every activity we have. So people understand and they know it. They hear it. Is it going to stop everybody from saying something? No.
Right.
But the answer to the question is when that does happen, it's getting to the bottom of what happened, and it's being not just reactionary, but it's going through the motions of finding out who it was and figuring out what you need to do and remedying the situation from the action, not just letting it go. Right. You know what I mean? So I think that's a big thing, and I think our kids know we're pretty good at doing that. And our kids kind of know. Like, again, I think the other thing too is that's one of the best parts about being here in Burlington for me is that I think we have great relationships with the kids. So when you go into the stands, it's not just, it's Mr. Hart, the administrator, it's Mr. Hart, the AD. Like, we have conversations. Like, we can have a conversation about winning, losing, about what happened this weekend, about what happened in the Patriots game. Like, it doesn't matter. And I think that a lot of our guys who work for us here at events and our coaches have those relationships. So when you have those relationships, the conversations just aren't about you did something wrong or, you know what I mean? It's about, hey, let's have that conversation. And then when something like that does happen, there is somebody that's willing to come down and say, hey, this is why it happened and this is what was said. So you can kind of get to the bottom of things because I think you have those relationships.
And you mentioned, going to Woburn and having the same messaging. Is this a conversation that's happening at, the large level between the different schools, districts?
It's at every level. I mean, again, the MIA at the top has sent out messaging, though these are the way that, for people who haven't done all the work, this is what you can do. You know what I mean? And then there are the leagues who have their messaging and because they think it's important. And what's a hot topic in one league may not be a hot button topic here. Right. So you write your messaging and you have your messaging around how you want it to happen, not just what's reacting to what's going on in your local area. You know what I mean? So I think we've taken the time, and over the last couple of years, we've had great conversations with our superintendents throughout the league and our principals throughout the league. And I think our messaging is all the same in the Middlesex League, is that there's a level of respect and sportsmanship that is a must. It's not an option. And we have incidents, and everybody does, and we deal with the incidents, and we try and deal with them across the league so everybody knows that everything's being done when stuff happens. And I think that gives everybody a little bit of confidence to kind of step up to the plate and do it because they know everybody's doing it.
And do you think that these incidents are something that, because it seems like they've been cropping up a lot recently. Do you think it's just because people are paying attention more, or do you think there's, something that the kids are seeing in the wider world that's making it seem like more permissible? Any? I know we're getting a little sociological here, but any theories on as to why this is sort of like a focus at this time?
Well, again, when I was in high school, nobody had a cell phone.
Well, yeah, that's a good point.
And if you want to be seen as funny, or you want to watch something on one of your Instagrams or your TikTok or your this thing or that thing, and you want to be that person in the crowd because you want to get on your thing, that's what people are doing. And everybody has a video camera now, and everybody wants to, something that was done 20 or 25 years ago, and it shouldn't have been done, but it was done, like maybe 5 people heard something or 10 people heard something and it went away. Now the same 5 people hear it and 5 people videotaped it, and that means 15,000 people saw it by the end of the night.
Right.
So I think that that's part of the difference. But I think that the other thing too is that, again, you watch a pro sport and you watch, 5 guys arguing in the stands. You know what I mean? So I think it all kind of bullies itself down. You know what I mean? I think people watch it and then they think it's okay to see it, and then you have people that come to games and they feel like it's okay to say something to a kid on the ice, or they feel it's okay to say something to an official. You know what I mean? And I think that those are kinds of things that we don't run into it a lot, but when you do run into it, you deal with it. And I think that, again, I don't think it's something that's new. I just think it's something that's probably easier to see now.
Yeah. I think that is true in a lot of
Everything.
aspects of our lives, where
Right.
things that we did back 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Sometimes we were glad there was no one with a camera. I guess one of the last things I wanted to talk about is, you were at the school committee meeting last night, which is in December for people watching this in January. And you kind of basically just said, the district is doing all that it can to, teach the kids the right way, prevent these sort of incidents. But, like you said, there's no guarantee was the big takeaway.
Well, again, I think that, what is it that anyone can guarantee about anything?
Right.
You know what I mean? And again, so I think the answers to the question is that you have expectations. And I think that we have very clear expectations from the athletic department to the coaches. I think we have very clear expectations from the coaches to our student athletes. And I think we have very clear expectations from our coaches to our parents of our student athletes.
Right.
I said, and we take the time to make sure that again, the athletic department meets with every single coach multiple times. We have a preseason meeting that gives our expectations of how our seasons should be run, about how our practices should be run, about how our communication should be run, and with our kids and with our parents. And it's, from us to the parents saying that when you pick your teams and you have your rosters, you will have a parent meeting, you know what I mean? And now with the Zoom and everything else, it's even easier for them now. So it's actually, so again, we're meeting to give team expectations, and we're giving opportunities so parents can ask questions if they have questions. And again, it's not about everything being answered to the satisfaction or the perfect answer to every single question. These are our rules, these are our expectations. And I think we're trying to get everything out there so that people understand. And are there things that are missed, or are things that are glossed over a little bit that probably could have a little bit more? Always and everything. And we're just trying to get better at what we're doing, not saying we're perfect at it.
Sure, absolutely.
So,
well, it seems like you at least have the right attitude, the sort of direction. So,
well, listen, it's constantly moving. You know that. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it's a constantly moving target. And if it's not this today, it'll be something else. 2 weeks from now that
Sure.
we'll be talking about and dealing with. But again, I feel like, we have great support from the administration. We have great support from the, superintendent. And everybody here wants there to be a level of success. You know what I mean? We're not going to tell everybody that something's not going to happen here or there and stuff like that. But we are going to tell you that when it does happen, we're going to figure it out. We're going to deal with it in the way it needs to be dealt with. And then we're going to, again, move on to the next thing, because again, you can focus on it, you can do education on it, you can do those things, but ultimately we're going to continue to try and move it forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
all right. Well, I very much appreciate you taking some time and coming and talking with us about this and about this topic.
thanks.
All right. We'll see you next time.
All right.
Finally, this month, we have an interview with Burlington Public Schools Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Raymond Porch, about how the district and the sports program can function as a platform to teach students about respect and inclusion for all people. Let's take a look. I'm now joined by Burlington Public Schools Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Mr. Raymond Porch, to talk about these recent incidents and sort of how, as a community, school departments can address them. Ray, thanks so much for taking some time and coming and joining me today.
Thank you, Rich. It's my pleasure. I always look forward to spending time with you when we can do it.
I appreciate it. As I outlined sort of like in the intro to this piece, there's just been a number of incidents recently in Massachusetts and across the country at high school where, there's just been sporting events that get out of hand. It's not always the players, a lot of times it's the fans, but, we want to talk about just sort of the atmosphere of sports and, tolerance. Do you see any sort of like reason nationally, like in the conversation, why maybe these events are sort of kind of cropping up at this time?
I do, and it's a good question. And I think part of the reason is we've had a period of time where folks haven't been able to be at these events, like very simplistically, to be able to be in sporting venues and spaces together in a social way is kind of what we talked about with students as well. And it feels like, and it might seem like, well, that can't be a reason, but that's part of it. I think, folks have been not consistently able to be in spaces together. I would also guess that, like, if there's been concerts or shows, that you probably have some unexpected dynamics happening there too. But, sporting events have been more publicized. But I think that that's part of it. And I think our general public well-being from the shoulders up is part of it too. And what I mean by that, I think that people are a bit stressed out. I think, sporting events are places where there's a lot of passion and a lot of emotional commit, like
right.
Cheering for my team, want my team to win. And for athletes, it's an outlet. And so I think if we're not going into those spaces whole, like we were before, we might have some of our own stressors or different things happening, and then my team's not winning and somebody else is cheering, and so we might react to that differently than we would before.
It's a charged situation.
Absolutely. I think some of those pieces are all a part of what we're seeing in these dynamics in some spaces. Some spaces there's some other things happening, but I think some of that is part of it for sure.
Sports obviously has a rich history of both, racial intolerance, but also as a driving force for, change.
Absolutely.
You want to talk a little bit about, just a little about the history that we have as far as like how sports can both be, on both sides of the issue.
Sure. I mean, I think easy one is Colin Kaepernick, right?
Right.
And what's fascinating is now we look around, the NFL has made all these huge steps forward around, social justice, and initially not so much. But we can go back even further. If you think about, like in the NBA, you had Chris Jackson, formerly Mahmoud Abdul Rauf was his latter name. Went to LSU. I think he had 1 year when he played with Shaquille O'Neal. Incredible scoring guard. He might have been 5'10", 5'11". Was a terrific player. Had Tourette's syndrome, as a student and as a college athlete, and then went on to play for the Denver Nuggets in the NBA. Incredible basketball player. But when he leaned into what he believed, in terms of his culture and his background and things like that, he was blackballed by the NBA. And I think about Colin Kaepernick in a similar fashion. We always come back to, this idea that, like, Kaepernick was talking about experiences that people had, and he wasn't, protesting in a way that's harming anybody. And it turned into a conversation about military and all these other things. And so those are instances where it didn't go well. And then I think about the NBA today and the WNBA and, the NFL and all of these wonderful initiatives where they are highlighting difference and talking about the importance of celebrating difference. And I think historically we've seen this too, that sometimes you have to have the bumps in the road for people to have enough repetitions to explore an issue, to say, oh, I didn't think about it that way before, and now my position is different. And I think you're seeing that in sports, in pro sports particularly. I think in college you're seeing, like what's happened in North Carolina and in certain places where folks are still wrestling with what they believe, and it's showing up in venues and universities where you're having polarized responses. So I just think it's part of the continuum in our society where things change. Sometimes it's too fast for some people, and for others it's not fast enough.
And one of the things I think that sports sort of like lends itself particularly for is, and now I'm talking more about the athletes and not so much the bigger fan base, is if people who came from diverse backgrounds and maybe only kind of hung out with people of their own race or people that look like them, but you get on a team and all of a sudden you're like, whoever makes that team is you're fighting with them. Talk about the unique opportunity that sports lends to sort of maybe help people kind of overcome things that they thought in the past.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny because when I think about where I played, and I played high school basketball and college basketball, and then
you coach, right?
And I coached.
I just want to make sure that people understood the context of
that
you're the DEI director, but you're also uniquely qualified to talk about this because you have a pretty good background in sports.
Sure. No, thank you. Playing basketball was one of the most important experiences for me in terms of who's sitting here today. So to your point, playing sports gave me a chance to experience different people from different experiences and backgrounds and cultures. I played on local teams with a lot of young people at the time when I was young, with people who were a lot like me, but we got to go into spaces and play against teams that looked different. And you competed against, and you built relationships, and you got to know their coaches and sometimes their family members. And those experiences grew into me playing on teams where, they were competitive, like local teams that traveled to other states and other cities. And so now they weren't just players or athletes that I was familiar with. I was getting to know teammates. I played in the Bay State games in Massachusetts at the high school level and at the college level. So I was meeting, college basketball players from BC, BU, Northeastern, who came from a variety of different places, other states. And so the relationship building, which you're referring to, opportunity is really, for me, was a big part of my growing up. And when I went on to coach, it was the same thing. There's a value in that. You're all competing for the same objective, even though you're all very different. And then you may be very different in terms of skills and ability, personality styles, vocal, not vocal. And you're trying to figure out how to play together the game that you all love, and you're all trying to win, right, and be better. And then you're navigating those other pieces. It's easier, I think, because you all have one thing in common at the bare minimum to start. And I think when we talk about relationships now, it's not always the case because I'm in education, you're doing media production. And so like we may have sports in common, like once we have a conversation, but we don't know what we have in common. So we have to explore and figure that out differently. Whereas when we show up to play on a team together, hey, we're both here to play hoops, right?
Exactly.
Same thing with football or baseball. So.
Right, we got a common start.
Yes. And then you can build on that, right? You can look at what's different through the lens of what we have in common. It's built into the experience.
Right.
That opportunity.
Now, I think, one of the things, because I did want to get back a little bit more onto the topic, of some of the incidents that have happened. Talk about like the importance of, the mentality of the coaching staff, because, we have had incidents, the name is escaping me, but it was recently an NFL coach was put on leave or fired because of, past statements. I know Duxbury High School.
John Gruden. John Gruden.
John Gruden, thank you. Had coaches that were using like anti-Semitic sort of language as like just part of their rhetoric, as late as like 2010. Talk about, how much the importance of like a district finding the right coach as far as this goes?
Oh, absolutely. So you referred to the John Gruden situation, and what was unfortunate about that is in that instance, he made comments about a senior executive person in the NFL who happened to be a person of color. I think the context was the comments were made in a prior timeline, and they just came to the surface. The Duxbury situation is more current in terms of the anti-Semitic comments that were being made. I think there were call signs that the defense was making, audibles on the offense of some sort. And I learned about that when I was still in Boston before I transitioned here. And we spent time talking with our coaches about that there as well. But I think what happens in those instances are a couple of things. I think, when I think about coaches, as a former coach myself, I think about, why? What's my why for coaching? So I told this story recently at the MECO Directors Conference I facilitated at last week. My coaches, I was lucky because they always wanted us to focus on who we were as people first. It would always say things like, as a player, you're representing your family, you're representing the team that you're on, your teammates, and they always opened. My coaches always opened with that message. Everything was built around that message. Never highlighting really how good you were, how talented you were, what your potential was to go play in high school or college or pros. It was really about who are you as a person, and you represent yourself as a person when you play athletics. In a very visual kind of way. You're wearing a uniform, it usually has a name across the front. And so when people see you, they see, if it's Burlington, they see Burlington High. Right? Or they see South Boston High, right? Or they see UMass Boston or American International College. And then you're secondary. So whatever they see happen with the uniforms, they contextualize that to all. And so for me as a coach, I always thought about, or I shouldn't say always, I consistently tried to think about or keep top of mind, how am I modeling as a coach? What's my why? So I would say to my players that you're always a person first, right? So this is what I sought, what I seek in coaches, good coaches at the scholastic level. Are they teachers? Are they mentors, right? Less they're acumen or expertise in the sport, but more these things first, because you can learn and build your acumen in basketball, football, or whatever the sport is. I've known great coaches who were fantastic at teaching the game and teaching the sport, and they were very competitive, but not so much growing the young person in front of them.
Right. I think that's what I was kind of driving at. Is there's a difference between just being able to teach somebody how to shoot a basketball and also someone how to be a teammate or be a representative of the school or the team.
Well, you have to prioritize those things yourself is what I was getting to. Like you have to show up with those things being intentional, just as intentional as it is to teach them to dribble and shoot. You're trying to cultivate the person. We met, myself and Dr. Conti met with our athletic department here.
Yes, actually, that came up at the school committee meeting.
Yes, recently with our athletic director,
who's also going to be part of this show.
Terrific, Mr. Hart and Mr. Sullivan, myself and Dr. Conti. And I guess what I'll say is this: one of the messages that we tried to kind of coherently deliver was that as a young person, you're going to make mistakes in this life. I made mistakes as an athlete. I made mistakes as a coach. I think what we want to communicate consistently to our coaches and to our athletes is that there's just less room for certain kinds of mistakes now. Now, do I agree that there should be less room? Well, no. Do I understand why there's less room? Well, yes. And so as an educator, it's our responsibility not to teach what we hope for our young people, but also to teach what is, if you know what I mean. Like what the conditions are. Those folks at Duxbury and in Danvers with the hockey situation. I just think it's important that we learn from those situations, like what we want to focus on with our young people who are playing sports, how we want to model as coaches, what the priorities are for us as people, because videos last forever. Audio clips can last forever. So you want to be mindful about what you're saying. Even if your intention isn't to do harm, you want to be aware of your environment, of the conditions that you're a part of, because it's easy to be misquoted and be misrepresented. And when you're a young person at the high school level, that's an enormous burden. And it actually, in some ways, it steals from them experiencing the joys and the unscripted experience that sometimes sports can be. But this is where we are, in our communities.
Now, I mean, you say, there's less room for mistakes, and that you think that is not necessarily a positive thing. But I imagine some people would say, well, that just means that we're less, forgivable or forgiving for outrageous behavior or, bigoted behavior or things like that. How do you find a balance between those two sort of, dynamics?
It's incredibly hard. It's a great question. It's incredibly hard. And so when we spoke to the athletes here for going into the winter season, I think what we're trying to communicate, Rich, is that you won't always get it right. And I think it's back to my original premise. Like, I think we have to have an and approach to these conversations, into how we mentor, develop, partner with our young people and our coaches. I think at school committee the other night, our athletic director said there are no guarantees. That was the term that he used. And I think the reason behind the comment is that there aren't, because ultimately if we teach, here are the conditions, here are the circumstances, and here's what the realities are when these kind of behaviors happen, we don't think that that's right, that a person can kind of be, have the harshest, accountability because they made a mistake. This is what the reality is, and here's why this is what the reality is. There is a lot of harm. There's racist, bigoted behavior that happens, and there has to be accountability for it because it's harmful beyond the game that you're playing. We have to teach that. Right. And at the same time, we have to, acknowledge that our young people are 15, 16, 17 years old, and they're still trying to figure out who they are in the world. And in order to support them, we have to be able to be good listeners. We have to be partners in their growth and development, because I think sometimes we dictate to young people too much. There's no room for them to kind of make decisions and choices. And so the balance that you referred to is hard. I think the thing that we can control is that it's a continuous conversation, and that we make ourselves available to hear what their questions are, and to hear feedback. And again, to encourage and give them scenarios that exist that are low risk scenarios, put them in situations where they have to be deciders. The great thing about sports and in basketball, and I'll say this, we would practice the last 2 minutes of a game, down 1, up 1, down 3, up 3, in practice. Well, why? Well, because in life you're going to be in situations, and if you don't practice the situations, you get unpredictable responses, right? You can kind of plan in your mind, those are stressful situations, right? And so what does pressure do to you, right? How do you respond in a pressure type situation? So I think we can produce those kind of scenarios for our young people more, where they get to kind of creatively explore those scenarios, and there's low risk, and they get reps, right? Just like in sports, they get reps. So these are some of the things that will help create some of the balance between those two elements that you spoke to.
Okay. And, I think this sort of dovetails onto what you were just kind of talking about, but if an incident like this happens where, let's say it's not necessarily the players, but even the fans are chanting something inappropriate, as we've seen in some of these schools, what do you think is the appropriate way for the district and the community to respond to an incident like that?
So for us, what I want us to be thinking about is how do we teach through difference, right? I've talked about this a lot. I think our response is to denounce anything that's harmful, anything that's racial, and that's devaluing someone's existence or culture or experience or background, where they come from, the way that they, experience the world, is not something we want to promote as a school district, on the field or off the field. So we will strongly denounce those kinds of behaviors. And if that happens to be an athlete of ours, we will also, try to teach through that experience. I think having conversations is one part of that, teaching through. I think accountability at the high school level is also a part of that. And I think Mr. Hart spoke to that, and as did Mr. Sullivan. What those consequences look like will vary given the situation and the severity of the circumstance, and how much learning and growth came from it. Is there an opportunity to do some healing with that young person, with that athlete, with that team? Because sometimes going through a healing process when you've misstepped is the accountability. You never forget it. So I think it's a scenario by scenario situation, but I think that there definitely has to be teaching and learning, and there has to be some real accountability measures around, playing sports is a privilege. You're a representation of the Burlington School District in this community. That is not something to be taken into lightly. Playing is not a right.
Right. Yeah.
So you have to appreciate the privilege that you have.
And that, I think, has been sort of some of the measures that other communities who have faced these situations have done. The canceled games or forfeited games, and some players have been removed, things like that.
Yeah, you're not gonna, not playing in the game isn't gonna kill you. And if that's the necessity in order to get your attention, or to for you to be reflective enough to acknowledge the harm, then that's what we do. We don't blink at all. If that's what it's warranted in that situation, then that's what we do, because it's a lot different risk level if someone's life is at stake, right? Or if some bodily harm can happen to someone. Not playing in the game doesn't create those conditions, and you get to learn from it. So again, different scenarios, but it depends on the severity of the circumstance, and I'm not against those kinds of measures if they're warranted.
Right. And as far as so it seems like, at the same time where, a whole fan base or a whole, group of students can become, inspired negatively to be, start chanting the wrong kind of thing. It seems like there's also potential that sports can kind of you can channel that spirit of competition into something positive as well.
I agree. I think back to, as a coach, I've seen and been in different situations and conditions and in gymnasiums and environments where, fans are chanting very negative things. And I've also been in environments where, as a visiting opponent, we'd have a situation and some tremendous sportsmanship was displayed by one of our guys or one of our players, and the gymnasium stood up and applauded. I think environments and cultures are indicative of the people in them, right? And so for me, it'll always come back to where are you on your journey as an individual? How do you show up in spaces in terms of your identity? How do you represent your family? How do you behave in an environment? I think one of the sayings that we use is, what is your integrity? What are you doing when you think people who are close to you know you are watching, right? Do you go into a venue where no one else is there that like you could be on a train or a bus, right? Or in a station, and act appropriately just because that's part of who you are? Or do you get swept up in, as you spoke to, the culture and the conditions that exist, and you become a part of that, right? It really is about being clear about who you want to be and how you want to represent yourself. And I think I've seen both sides of it, really super positive environments where people are about, encouraging and cheering, and they see behavior that's not appropriate, addressing it in a respectful way. Right. Hey, we don't do that here. And my young people being in the space wow, that was pretty cool. And I've also been in environments where it goes the other way. I might say as a coach, hey, we don't do that here, and the response from the fan might be something very disrespectful. So we always make it about the individuals, and what we control is what we do. It isn't always going to be And this is why Mr. Hart said no guarantees, because we're always on the journey, on the approach and our growth and our learning. And what we can do is continue to make sure that they're part of the conversation in athletics.
Now, I don't want to blow up this conversation too much, but I do kind of want to tie it back in, because this is kind of where we started, was, me asking, do you think there's a bigger picture reason why, these incidents have been happening recently? And, we just talked about it. It's, there is a way of getting swept up in the culture. There's a way of seeing examples of other people and just sort of behaving in a certain way. And I just wonder, right now in 2021, our young people, they're looking out at the world, they're seeing, entire professional sports stadiums erupting with "Let's go Brandon." We got politicians just yelling and screaming at each other. We have just it seems like there's a moment happening right now in this country that it's almost inevitable that it'll trickle down to our students.
Yeah, and you know what, Rich, it's a great point. And I think what it highlights for me as an educator is some of what I've always kind of thought about. And I'm a big fan of history. Mm-hmm. And I think when we go back and we talk about, as a parent, who are the heroes in our young people's lives, right? If the heroes in our young people's lives are athletes and musicians only, and they look at them as demagogues or put them on these pedestals, then that would be a good through line for me based on what we're seeing, right? It's swept up in emotional charge. That's a part of the dynamic as a human, right? But if I idolize, what I'm seeing in an athlete or someone who's in a public facing kind of situation, or someone who's a star or perceived, athlete or a musician or someone in that category, and I idolize these folks, then they would have that kind of impact. Again, who do our young people look up to, right? And why? Is it politicians?
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much even looking up to. It's just sort of so much of what's sort of being inundated, what they're seeing out there, and it's sort of behavior among what we would consider the professional leaders of our country is not what it used to be.
Well, and I think to that point, right? I think again, it's back to, do we see people who are politicians as more than human? Do we see athletes as more than human? Right. So that's the space I'm leaning into. Do we see the people who are stars or people who are in the public eye as more than human, and by proxy expect more from them or model what we see in them because we see them doing it, or it has an impact on us because they're in front of us on a TV screen, or these kind of things are conversations that we have to continue to have, because what we have to remember is those folks are human as well. There are ramifications for those behaviors, whether you're a politician, whether you're an athlete, musician. There are ramifications for everything that we all do. You may not see them. You might catch that 15 seconds on TikTok or Facebook and be like, oh, that happened. But you're not seeing what happened after that, the impact to their children, their family, the blowback. You're not seeing that always. Or you might just see the blowback, right? I just think that our young people don't always get to contextualize all that they're taking in from social media, all that they're taking in from mass media.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It's sort of if you look out and it just looks chaotic, and then it's easier to sort of act that way. Sure.
Celebrities have a big platform. Our young people get to see a lot of our politicians and athletes because of the platform that they have. And I've said this. I think our young people have way too much information that they take in, and they don't get enough context. And
yes.
To create context, you have to have time, right? You have to be intentional. You have to have conversations. You have to actually slow down a little bit to process some of these things. And our young people don't always get the time to do it, which is why I spoke earlier about they don't have as much room for error, right? Because you get caught on video, it's out there, it's forever.
Right.
Someone sees you chanting something inappropriate at a game, you've never done that before, that one time on video, so it's a done deal.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I think the scariest thing in the world would be seeing your own name trending on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean it's a scary thing. I mean, you know, and it speaks to our conditions in our society that we see something on video and now we measure that person's value in our society. They're forever bad, you know, and I think that's a problem. You know, we spend more time watching and listening in short glimpses people that we don't know. We don't know what the before was. We don't know what the after is, and then we make a decision on that person, who they are, what their values are, and I think that's bad. I think it's bad for our young people. I think that's bad for our communities. I think that's bad for our society as a whole. I guess the question folks would ask, well, what do we do about that? You know, for me, in this role and being in Burlington as an educator and being a parent, is you have to teach through those things. You have to use those experiences to say, hey, what are you not seeing? What's the story that you're telling yourself when you watch this?
Right.
Right.
Like you think you know that person.
What do you think? Right.
I think, you know, so we're kind of wrapping up. Any final thoughts, you know, like from your position, as a district, you know, obviously, like I said at the top of this, you know, this has not been something that we're not doing this show because it's something that happened here in Burlington. You know, obviously, as Mr. Hart said at the school committee meeting, no guarantees that it never will, but just final thoughts on, you know, how the district can kind of help foster a more positive, you know, inclusive sort of environment.
Well, I think one of the things that we've been talking about lately is really celebrating all of the wonderful things that our athletes and the folks that are playing on our teams are doing outside of just playing sports. I think that's a big part of it. You know, we've got students volunteering in the community. We've got students participating in a variety of opportunities outside of sports where they're modeling, right? And on the fields and on the courts as well, they're modeling. And so I think one of the things we can do is continue to celebrate moments where we see great sportsmanship. Celebrate moments where, you know, our young people, regardless of the score, are doing things the right way, competing hard, being good sportsmen and sportswomen, and where our coaches are highlighting that in real time, highlighting the opponent's sportsmanship, right, and teamwork. I think because when our teams, whether it's Burlington teams or Stoneham teams, when we're modeling for our communities, we're out front doing the thing that we want our fans to be doing, it's harder for our fans to not do it.
Right.
Right? Regardless to the score or the outcome, these are things that we can do. And to continue the conversations with our young people, continue to check in with them, see what's going on with them, how are they feeling about, you know, these experiences and the environments that they're going into, how they're feeling about their relationships with their coaches. And, you know, I think that part of it is also a part that has to be a focus as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, I very much appreciate you taking the time and coming in and talking with me about this.
Of course.
It's an important subject, and we always appreciate, you know, your insight. So thank you once again. There you have it, an in-depth look at how athletics can be a platform to help teach students better behavior and inclusion for all people. I'd like to thank my guests, MIAA Executive Director Bob Baldwin, BHS Athletic Director Sean Hart, and Burlington's Director of DEI Raymond Porch. I'd also like to thank all of you for watching. We'll be back next month with another edition of BNEWS In Depth, so stay tuned.